Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
And for this episode, we have a guest, our friend, filmmaker Alexa Fraser-Herron. Say hey.
Hey.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
This episode, we're going to be talking about Nosferatu the Vampyre, the Herzog film from 1979. And a heads up for next episode, this is going to be really unique. We're covering Faking It Phoebe, the novelette. How long is it, Chad?
It's 46 pages long.
Sounds like a novelette.
Yeah.
Faking It Phoebe from 2017. And as a guest on that episode, we're going to be having Meg Ellison back, which I'm really looking forward to. Maybe tell people real quick why we're doing Faking It Phoebe.
Man, it's a hard call. For some reason...
What is it?
I mean, so Faking It Phoebe...
This was completely your decision. I have no idea what it is.
If you could also add in why it's a novelette, not a novella.
Well, I looked that up quite a bit. It seems to be you just describe it how you want to describe it. So, Hellbound Heart is a novella. They're equally short or long, depending
What's
on...
Hellbound Heart?
That's a Clive Barker book.
Oh.
It's the one that Hellraiser is based on, so it's a novella. So whether or not something is or isn't a novella seems to be the territory of the marketing department involved in the book more than anything else. But the author of Faking It Phoebe is Alberta J. McMorris, which I think may or may not be a pen name. And the person's hashtag or not hashtag, but the person's handle on Instagram is @Petrov Margaret, Petrov Margaret. And she was really responsive when I tagged her on it, or he, I have no idea really. And I don't know, there was something just about Meg being a paperback novelist, and we had done a lot of movies in a row, not counting the Facebook episode, and I like doing more books, and this book just popped up in my Amazon feed. There's the algorithm thing again, and it's just a weird book that appears to be self-published, and it's kind of fun, and I don't know, I like the idea of exploring something so short with somebody so legit like Meg. She's like a real deal award-winning author, and I'd like to just see her perspective on this sort of thing. And I know she likes indie vampire fiction quite a bit, so yeah.
So we normally do plugs. I have nothing to plug, but maybe instead of a plug for our podcast, the one you're listening to right now, Chad, what are the numbers like for the Facebook episode?
They're doing all right. They're about twice as strong as our usual episode. I know that you see it as some form of activism for people to hear your rants about Facebook and be convinced to leave the platform. So if you're on the fence right now about whether or not it's destroying the world, or you feel like it's just making your life worse, listen to our episode. Listen to Mark just wail about it from the rooftops. And if you're not convinced by that, then I don't know what else to tell you.
But it's like twice the numbers.
Yeah, are
people just going on iTunes and searching for Facebook? Like, why would people be coming to that episode more than others?
I occasionally search for really innocuous subjects on podcasts.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I never do that. Okay, there you go. That's my ignorance.
Yeah, who knows? But it's still...
So if we did like a John Hamm episode, would our
that's
numbers
actually a really good idea
or something?
Mm-hmm.
I did look, though, our most listened to episode of all time is Neon Demon.
Still.
Yeah, still. And it's like it continues to be a thing. I think some films that people just don't get, they just look for explanations. They're like, I don't understand it. So I could easily see somebody going, what the fuck happened in Neon Demon?
Right.
And then, running into our show somehow.
And getting no answers.
Yeah.
And moving on.
I feel like I was a little unfair to Keanu in that episode.
He's fine.
Yeah.
Sign up for our newsletter. Go to scarythoughts.org. On the right-hand side, there are some fields to fill out, and we'll keep you abreast of what's up with us, some recommendations, things about the episode, previous episodes. And, I'm sorry, I moved on from the plugs part. I'm so used to it just being us. Alexa, plug something. What's going on? You're working on a movie. I don't know if it's too early to plug, but maybe you can tell us about it.
So I'm working on two projects. I am producing Darcy Drollinger's first feature-length film called Shit and Champagne, which if you're local in San Francisco, Darcy is one of our local drag icons who also is co-owner of Oasis nightclub and does a lot of drag theater there. And Shit and Champagne is one of our longest running, most successful shows. We actually have a cult following already, known as Shitheads, of course. And we're in development, fundraising for the feature, which we'll be shooting in the next year. And so we're on Facebook for that, Shit and Champagne. And then I'm also developing my own personal first feature that I will be writing and directing, which is a psychedelic Western that I have nothing that I could really direct people towards. But I did just get a writer's residency in France for the month of September to write it. So
cool.
That's something that I'm super excited about, but currently have no internet footprint for that.
Yeah. So it's in early development, basically?
Yeah, like I'm cobbling together the story and plot and character. And
what's a psychedelic Western? Like, I think when I first heard you say that, or someone told me that's what you were working on, the only thing I could think of was The Bad Batch or Zabriskie Point.
So there is technically a subgenre already called acid Western, but I just haven't seen anything quite like what I want to do. And what I want to do is essentially a spaghetti Western with a female lead that's pretty much like if 90s Courtney Love hate fucked 60s Clint Eastwood and they had a baby.
That sounds terrifying.
And there's sort of like a peyote ritual type situation in the first act, and so that she's hallucinating basically throughout the rest of the film. So I describe it as a 60s psychedelic rock poster come to life.
Courtney Love was in Straight to Hell, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Oh, I'm hoping to have, a sit down with Alex Cox one day. I think I will do him proud.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. All right. On to this episode. Spoiler alert. Well, if you don't know the Dracula story, I mean, without jumping into it, I sort of feel like anytime you watch a Dracula story, you're just sort of waiting to see, like, what points will they hit?
Well, and honestly, I think that if you click to listen to a podcast about a movie that's over an hour long and you're not expecting spoilers, then you kind of get what you deserve.
Well said.
Yeah, and this movie's been out for, 40 years? So get to it, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'll just say, this movie, I'd never seen it. Like, I sort of thought I'd seen every vampire film ever and thought I'd seen it. And then I watched it and I hadn't. And
me too.
Holy shit, this movie's good. Oh my God.
It's excellent.
So into
I think it might be one of the best ones I've ever seen.
Yeah, I just like scraping my jaw off the floor every 10 minutes. Alexa, I had asked if you wanted to join us for an episode. And around the same time, Chad had been on a Herzog kick. And so he suggested Nosferatu the Vampyre, and I pitched to you, and your response in an email was, I grew up in a Herzog household.
Yes.
Which I didn't ask you to explain, but I'd love to hear what that means.
So I am a filmmaker, and I think a lot of it I have to owe to my mother, because she was like, I grew up in a house where, like, when the Oscars were on, or when Siskel and Ebert, which in the house was known as Gene and Roger, was on, I would get yelled at if I talked. And Herzog, for whatever reason, was just one of those... She really liked, it was mostly his 70s era, I think, of films, like he's pretty prolific. I think his directing credits at this point are upwards of 70 directing credits. But yeah, she adores Nosferatu, especially to the point that like she maneuvered a trip to Delft and like, really wanted to go to some of the locations where it was shot.
Try to trap a rat and take it home.
She definitely wouldn't be into that. What I think her aim was to probably glide through the town square pretending she was Isabella Gianni.
Oh, yeah.
And she did come back from that trip with a sweater she bought because there is a market in that square. And I, to this day, have that sweater. She ended up giving it to me.
That's great.
Yeah.
You didn't wear it.
I know. I considered it. I
Okay.
considered it. No. It's a lighter, it's one of my summer blacks. I was feeling the need for something a little bit more cozy today.
The thing that really struck me the most about this in a sort of meta way is that this is what a horror film looks like when it's not concerned with being... No, let me put it this a different way. This is what a horror movie looks like when really fucked up dark people are making a horror movie. It's not just like doing genre. This is like when you have a bunch of people who have a really messed up perspective on the world actually making something messed up. And so even though it is derivative willfully so. And it's slightly cartoonish and actually pretty funny at points. There's something at the core that is definitely like rotten. And that's, Kinski and Herzog and their relationship. And like, I think that really comes through in this movie, that it's not just this sort of glide through Gothic cinema. It's actually got this weight to it that cuts through. No?
Oh, I completely agree. And two of the components for me that work into that is one is how slow it is. And that's one of my favorite things about Herzog. And being that my favorite film of his is Aguirre, The Wrath of God, there's some really gorgeous, long, slow, meditative there's one shot in particular of rapids, and it's just like the full frame of rapids and you just feel like you're like nodding off and waking up and it's still rapids, And Roger Ebert, actually, there's like a review from 1979 where he talks about people complain about how this film moves too slow. And he's like, I honestly would love for the entirety of this film to be as empty as the progression of Jonathan making his way to the Count's castle.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what lends itself to that creepiness, because it's sort of when you like leave it open like that, it's up to us to then fill in, right? Yeah. And then the other aspect for me is Kinski himself was really fucked up and dark and gross. Like if you've ever read his autobiography.
Yes, well, I have. I actually just bought a copy for Chad.
Oh my goodness.
To read.
I'm excited.
So I read that.
Yeah.
My mom got it from the library and then went on a vacation. And when I was a teenager, I like read it in secret. I felt like I couldn't even, like I put it back where I found it, and like, because I thought I'd get in trouble for reading it. And holy shit, it blew my mind. It was very unsettling.
Tell people why.
The two big things that come to mind is he was just had such a voracious appetite for women, and he has this and he's so proud, like so, such a big swinging dick throughout the whole book about it. And like he had this fascination with like describing a woman's face and how beautiful she was, and that her lips is being likely identical to her vulva. And then the other thing that sticks out to me is when he had some kind of growth in his throat, and he claims that it got so bad and so painful and so big. One day he was walking down the street and started to, he wasn't able to breathe all of a sudden. And he somehow found a sword. Like, have you read this yet?
I don't remember this.
He found a sword and like shoved it down his throat to lance it himself. And he describes all of the pus and disgustingness that came out of this nodule in his throat that he then choked on. He's a fascinating person, but I couldn't help but watch, especially when he's like lifting up Isabel's nightgown in the final scene and just thinking about.
Well, I think there's so much about Kinski and Herzog that's really interesting. Is there is so much myth making on both sides that they've both done with their art and with their lives that it's hard to sort of know where one begins and one ends, and then where one begins and one ends between them. Because, for example, one thing about Kinski's autobiography is that it's sort of known that Herzog and Kinski sat around and actually wrote parts of it together. Like a lot of the hate that Kinski writes about Herzog actually had a hand in writing some of that venomous writing. Mm-hmm. But then again, maybe that's not even true. Maybe Kinski did write it all himself, and Herzog's lying that he participated in his own. Again,
that's like one of those things we're just never going to know.
Yeah.
And I think it's appropriate for this film too, because there is this whole concept of like, you never really know what reality is. Yeah. Like when Jonathan makes his way to the inn, they're like, why do you want to go to Count Dracula's castle? It's ruins. But then when he gets there, and there are many exterior shots of the actual ruins, but when he shows up, it's a castle. And there's even the little violin playing phantom boy that looks real. He's not treated in any way to indicate that he's dead or a spirit or anything. And he has 2 appearances in the film. Yeah. My favorite is when he tells the coachman at the inn, there's a coachman preparing a coach with like 4 horses or something. He's like, I'd like to pay you a handsome price to take me to the Count Dracula's castle. He's like, there is no Borgo Pass, but the road's right there.
Yeah.
Let me pay you for your coach. I have no coach.
Yeah, and he's like, let me buy a horse. He's like, can't you see I have no horses?
Yes.
And then later on, he picks him up, like on the road. It's totally absurd.
And another kind of the hallucinatory aspect of the castle is the feast
Oh my
The
gosh!
not
thank
not
you.
not at the night, not the first feast where he cuts his finger, but the next morning where there's just like
Food
food
there.
for an army, and it's all beautifully cooked, and there's even like taxidermied animals representing what there
Yeah.
is to be eaten on the table. Like no servants, just a boy playing violin.
Totally. And what really got me were the grapes. I was like, okay, this is definitely Fantasyland.
Yeah.
Where do these grapes come from?
Yeah,
Carpathian grapes. Delicious. The myth making is interesting to me because Herzog is so adamant that it doesn't matter in interviews. Whenever people ask him, like, hey, what was it like to drag the boat over the mountain? He's like, it does not matter. Only what is on the screen matters. But he seems to have like such joy. He like calls Kinski the pestilence all the time, which is my favorite name for anybody
it
ever.
too.
It's like he's a pestilence. And then I've read a couple of his books now, and I almost enjoy I liked Conquest of the Useless more than I liked Fitzcarraldo. And I think that is sort of a common experience with him. Like people like the idea of Herzog more than they like his films, but they're very good, obviously. But to me, like I was all in on the myth of him before I ever even started watching any of his films.
sure. Well, it's funny that the only thing that matters is what's on screen. That refrain that Herzog seems to live under, that seems to be almost like his life's work is to embody that philosophy. Is it really brings up this question because that concept doesn't just exist in the ether. Like, oh, you have to do anything for art. Like, no, he really did. Like, he broke laws and murdered animals and broke hearts and made people his slave on set and was accepting of the pestilence of Kinski because it didn't matter how much they fought. It didn't matter how awful Kinski was to work with. He was great on screen, and the final product is all that matters. And I feel like this kind of brings back the discussion we had on our black metal episode, where there's this question about, well, okay, at what cost really? Like, this is a fascinating philosophy when artists sort of put forth that they want to create at all costs, but at some point, well, what at the expense of being National Socialist, at the expense of bankrupting your family, at the expense of, where, again, there's this line between myth making and reality, but also a lot of people have ruined lives for the sake of art, and it's hard to separate that from the work when you know that that's the conditions under which it was made.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say to even have that conversation or like play with it, like the thing that was made has to be great. Like it has to be.
But does that excuse it?
No, but I think that there's an entire subclass of people who act like that and do those terrible things because they think what they're doing is great.
Sure.
And then that's automatically inexcusable, right? So just dickish behavior is no go. But then, to me, it's just
But
like
how do you know if you're not a Herzog?
I mean, I think people let you know.
By their deeds you shall know them.
Yeah. But, then it's like, okay, how good does something have to be? Like if I went through the streets right now and said, okay, like I can cure AIDS right now, but I have to shoot 40 people in the face. I mean, to me, that seems all right. I'm just saying like there's at a certain point you get a thing that is worth the cost, right?
Yes.
But it's weird with art because like there's no utility to art. So, how do you maintain, I mean, there's sort of a utility to art, but like not in the way that like a vaccine for a disease would be. Like you could make that calculation a little bit easier if there's a thing that the thing does. But, somewhere right out there's somebody who's like, man, Blade was way better than Nosferatu. Whatever he did to these poor people is not worth it, right? Like,
I love Blade.
I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's true.
He has preached in interviews about, well, you have to find your own moral compass, which is funny coming from him because, you already have some evidence as to how his is oriented. He's also told filmmakers seeking advice, like, you just have to do whatever. Like, you are, like, ordained to make the film you want to make and by any means necessary, which to me is like, sure, for the underdog that's super talented, I want them to feel empowered by that statement, but there are plenty of other mediocre filmmakers that I'd rather them not drink that Kool-Aid.
Yeah, I've always
it's all
thought
subjective.
I've always thought film was so interesting because there's such even now there's a much higher bar to making a film than there is to almost any other type of artwork, and I don't know. It seems like to have even gotten to the point of making a film, you have to be a certain kind of person, and I think those kinds of people are probably more willing to go the distance, like Herzog recommends. Like, I mean, I can't imagine like an open mic ukulele player doing whatever it takes, you know, versus somebody who's got 50 grand worth of their friends' money on the line to make this cool thing. Like, it's going to be totally different.
Sure. I think also to that, I remember Herzog said in some interview, they were talking about how much it cost to make this movie, which translated to today's cost would be like $1.25 million or something like that.
Droll.
And he really begged, borrowed, and steal literally to make this happen, like he did with many of his films. It's also interesting when artists who are like that and teach that. I mean, he's a teacher, and this is the type of thing he teaches. This is by any means necessary philosophy of art making.
He teaches his students how to pick locks, literally.
Yeah.
He has claimed that on the record.
Yeah, exactly. But he's so institutional, he could probably hire the most expensive lock picker on planet Earth and fly them directly to pick one lock on his expense report, you know? Like he's just completely at another level. It's just interesting when, I mean, this is, you know, rock and roll is rife with this sort of thing, right? The renegade who has all the money in the world, but his work is still very interesting and challenging and taking on pretty fascinating subjects. They're all documentaries now, but
yeah, I wish that he would go back to some of that really, to me, just fun, juicy premises.
Yeah.
The premise of we're going to move a boat by hand through the Amazon or through the jungle.
Going back to something, National Socialism and the history of German cinema is something that let me start this over.
Nazis. It's not an episode of Scary Thoughts unless we talk about Nazis.
Okay, yeah, okay, let's just keep going.
There's definitely some Nazi stuff in.
Well, there is, but the question of why did he choose to remake Nosferatu, I think is super fascinating. My read across what he said is trying to reclaim German cinema, that the history of German cinema has a Nazi problem. Mm-hmm. And there were these early amazing filmmakers like Murnau and Fritz Lang. Yeah. And then there were Nazis, and they ruined everything. And he's trying to reclaim a Germanic cinema that has this dead period in the middle of it, and Murnau for him is as high as it gets. I think it's really interesting to be, as an artist, fatherless is essentially how he was describing it. Mm-hmm. To not be able to look to the immediate earlier generation for influence and for mentorship.
No, I love what you're saying, and I agree. Yeah, there was something in the audio commentary where he's talking about that and how, you know, I don't think Americans understand that Germans really do feel conflicted about this, about their culture, that there is this rough period where, you know, we had no filmmakers to aspire to or admire in the generation previous to ours because they'd either fled, been killed, or were complicit with Nazis. And I mean, in American culture, we don't have anything like that.
Oh, no, wait.
Oh.
The South.
Oh, well.
Is that. To me, the difference of when you go to Germany and you go to a train station and there's a plaque reminding you that Jews and gypsies and homosexuals were processed through this station to go to Dachau or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then you go to the South and there are statues to generals who fought for the South. Right. It's very different. And celebrating. I mean, Riefenstahl is kind of an anomaly, but I think the South still has this problem.
Right. I think I was thinking more in terms of film, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Well, Birth of a Nation.
Yes.
That's Hollywood all the way. It wasn't like somebody in Mississippi made that movie.
Okay, that's fair.
You know?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I do think there is one thing in this film that kind of contradicts all this for Herzog, and that's the fact that Dracula is sort of an anti-immigration narrative, that when you think of like what collective dread is being reflected in, obviously seduction, vampire stories are often about people's predatory nature and being overcome and being controlled by another person and being subsumed by someone's will. But it's also about this person from a foreign land who collects literally their own soil and brings it and dumps it and unleashes a plague upon your local, and like steals your women. And this film does have that. That's literally what happens. This foreigner gets on a boat and ruins a town.
Yeah, I agree, but my read was more like the plague is like the plague of awareness.
What?
So I was really enamored with just how soulful Herzog made the Count, and that scene where he's talking about what was it? Just the absence of love is abject cruelty. And that's what he really wants from Lucy, is for her to love him the way she loves Jonathan. She says, even God can't have that love from me. And from the first shot of, we have the film opens with all these mummies that Herzog shot in Mexico. And then it's this really awesome, beautiful slow-mo shot of a bat. And then the very first person we see, the first character, is Isabella Gianni waking up from a nightmare. And from the get-go, it's like she already knows about him, that he's coming. She's like very literally like says, I feel like there's this terrible thing coming. And Jonathan's just like, like doesn't respond. He's impotent, right? Which feeds into sort of the overarching narrative of Jonathan throughout Dracula narratives being impotent, and Dracula is like virile and sexual and lustful. But Lucy throughout the whole film is just so on the ball about everything. She like even wanders through the corridor, that scene where there's the big funeral procession of almost like 24 caskets. And she's like pleading with them. Like, I know what's happening. Let me speak to, Let me speak to how does she put it? The group of, all the guys that first are sitting around the dead sailor, the lone dead sailor, and they realize, we think this is a plague, and everyone bails. They're like, oh, they've disbanded. Well, let me talk to the mayor. He's dead.
Yeah.
I also love that this film plays into one of my favorite narrative tropes, which is the Cassandra complex, where you have a female character that knows what's up and nobody will listen to her.
But something that's also interesting about her knowing in advance and all that is that I find that her relationship with Jonathan Harker, you just kind of have to... this is maybe just my read on Germans, and I don't want to bag on German. Like, I would move to Berlin in a heartbeat if I could. But Germans, their affect is so flat as a culture that in English, American, Italian cinema, when you have a character that's in love, you don't even have to have the sound on. But in a German film, you can have like this, quote, passionate romantic couple, and they just seem like two people talking about nothing unless you knew the dialogue. And so Jonathan Harker and Lucy they just seem so... You have to know the script, the screenplay, to know that they're like passionately in love. But Ajani and Kinski,
oh yes,
they both have these blanched out faces, and even she has this overbite, so she's often mouth breathing, and so she has these forward front teeth just like Kinski's Nosferatu. So they look the same. They match before they've even met.
Yeah, there's
visually.
Strange ways that they almost seem like actually the couple you should be rooting for. Yeah. Like when Jonathan comes home, he's like, I'm going to go on this trip where there's like wolves and thieves and ghosts and it's cool. And she's just like, no, don't go. You're going to be in danger. Please come with me. Let's go to the beach where we fell in love. And then it's like super bleak and depressing.
That beach sucks.
Yeah, the beach looked terrible, which it actually was the same. I don't know if it was intentional or if it's just that's the weather that they got that day. But like the whole palette is like her, right? It's totally washed out and pale, just like her clothes and the house.
That's the kind of beach you'd like kill an Arab on in an existential novel. You know, it's just gray and bleak,
right.
And then that happens, and there's things that happen after that. Like, do they matter? No, they don't matter.
Right.
It's interesting, like how his motivation is to get a better house for her, and she doesn't seem to care, and their house is already pretty good. And then he goes like, when he goes out to the Carpathian Mountains, he goes like full on, I will sell this house today. You know, that's the whole thing. I will sell this house today. And it's just like, I will walk the fuck up there and sell Dracula this house next door to me, which is the other thing. It's like kind of hilarious. And you wonder if he's like, will my property value go up if a count comes in and rehabs this derelict property next to mine? Probably. I mean,
I didn't think of that part. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I think the Jonathan throughout is, when I said the plague of awareness, Jonathan to me is like the poster boy for having no awareness whatsoever. Like he goes to see Renfield, who's like teetering on a maniacal outburst the whole time, giggling. And he's like unfazed by it. Mm-hmm. And then when he shows up, and, you know, like in Murnau's original Nosferatu, like there is a like ramping up of the fangs and the ears and the nails, but Kinski answers the door fully as Nosferatu, and he at no point is like, maybe I made a mistake in coming here.
Do you think that would be a better technique? Like if you were a vampire, like if you were like, here it is, balls out, and you were like, oh, that's weird, but maybe he has alopecia, and you went in, like that would be more tricky than if he was suddenly becoming more feral as you went along. If you're like, wait a minute, those fangs were not there yesterday. Like, I think that would probably be more unsettling than just like, hello, nice to meet you. I'm the undead.
They're both choices that I think, depending on how they're done, I would probably appreciate both. For me, when I watch it, to make sense of it so that I'm not just rolling my eyes constantly at how dumb Jonathan is, I'm like, well, mind control is a very common vampire trait. Dracula supposedly could control minds. He even says towards the end to Lucy, like, if you give me your love, Jonathan will remember you again. For anyone listening to this that doesn't care about spoilers and hasn't seen the film, like Jonathan, by the time he makes it to Visburg, he doesn't remember Lucy, which is really awful. And so she's kind of beside herself that her husband has finally returned, but he's like a shell of the man he once was and doesn't recognize her. But that, to me, is maybe what's at play, too, is that throughout, Jonathan is perhaps acting, you know, under some sort of influence. I thought his casting is super interesting because he looks older and more mature than what I'm used to seeing for Jonathan. Like, especially if you watch the original Nosferatu, that Jonathan is insufferable. The Hutter character, he's like as boyish as you can get. But in this one, he is so like almost sober looking, but he continually makes bad decisions.
Mm-hmm. And he, don't forget Keanu. Also another.
I mean, that's
Jonathan,
like there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like that's the perfect. I feel like that movie in particular, his performance in Dracula was the thing that really got him the reputation of being a really wooden bad actor. Mm-hmm. Like before that, he was just the dude from Bill and Ted's, and then everybody was like shitting on his acting ability after Dracula. But that movie was such a big deal when it came out, like the Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Not a good movie.
Yeah, but it has like really enduring imagery.
I know this is a common gripe from me, but I feel like that is yet another example of Hollywood's, if I throw enough money at a problem, it'll just manifest an enduring quality. Like, I think that movie is genuinely terrible. Like, it is a bad movie, and it's not charming, and it's not so bad it's good. It's just shit filmmaking, but a lot of talented people worked on it, and so there are these visual moments that I don't know if I can blame Coppola for. I think I can blame the producer's wallet and for hiring, some very talented folks to make some visual imagery happen.
I think all the medieval stuff in that movie, like before he becomes Dracula looks great. Like that weird musculature, armadillo armor. That stuff is just so cool looking. And then, his Victorian vampire outfit with full round, like John Lennon glasses and stuff like that. That is a very strong vampire look. There's a dude who to this day in New Orleans does vampire tours. He's like a 400-pound version of that character. He's just
So it's partly the comic book guy from the comic book
From the
store
Simpsons?
owners. From the
yeah,
Simpsons.
he's like, if you took the comic book guy from Simpsons and melded it with Gary Oldman's Dracula, you would have this dude that gives tours.
I am going there next week. I'm going to look him up.
You should. Whatever the biggest, most popular vampire tour is, it's that guy's.
We did a ghost tour last time we were there, and it was simultaneously so lame and so awesome. I highly recommend that.
That sounds
shit.
about right.
Yeah, right.
I adored that movie when it came out, but I was also 12. And I also loved costumes and production design. And it still, in my mind, stands out as one of my favorite Dracula adaptations for those reasons. Also the score. But having really dug into Nosferatu, I think this one just has so much more going for it, especially in terms of substance.
I think that also talking about throwing money at a problem and talking about the budget of Nosferatu, something that it's really easy to bag on CGI. And here I'm not talking about Bram Stoker's Dracula, I just mean in general. I think this movie really delivers on a reason CGI just doesn't convey what practical effects can. And, you know, for example, no movie would be made with 10,000 rats ever. Like, that will never happen again. And partly because that's fucking crazy and shouldn't have happened in the first place, but also because it would just be CGI'd, and then it would be too perfect. And then you're not watching a movie. I found when I was watching this with Monique, the rat thing came in, and she said the thing that I said to myself when I first saw it, which was, what the fuck with those rats? Like, did they do that? Like, of course they did. It was 79 or 78 when they shot it. Like, yeah, that's a lot of rats. That's a lot of real rats. And you can't de-horrify it. If it was CGI, you can de-horrify it. You can just go like, well, that's not real. That's just computer. But you're looking at like thousands and thousands and thousands of rats crawling over each other. And that's far more a visceral experience when engaging with the film, for example.
Yeah. There's one thing where I think CGI could have helped a little bit. And it's that, you have the Count and he's doing, vampire shit. And his only real feat of vampire strength is carrying that big ass paper mache coffin through. And it just like, when you talk about like your eye catching, like what something looks like. Yeah. Even if you were supernaturally strong, something still has like a mass to it. And it just looked garbage,
It's like the coffee cup trope in film.
The what?
How you can always tell someone's carrying an empty coffee cup.
Yeah. When they pretend to sip from an empty cup. Yeah.
But like, I would have liked to have seen a few Kinski more special effects. Like even
if he turned into a bat.
Even at the time, maybe like a little bit more gore effects or something like that. Something like not
how
too
there was
much.
no
but
gore. I kind of loved that this was a vampire film with almost no blood.
I feel like it was like a more emotional film. It was more about emotion and emotional terror of what it means to live eternally.
Yeah.
And maybe that was, I don't know, more the focus instead of the gore.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of my favorite aspects to vampire fiction and vampire films is this question about eternal life, and that when you live forever, you're confronted with that existence is pain and suffering and too real. Actually, I mean, this reminds me of the conversation we had about there's such thing as too much money. Whether it's... Like when you win at Monopoly, you're just an empty vessel. There's nowhere to go, and I think that's true of eternal life as well. It's the be careful what you wish for. Like eternal life seems like this thing that we all wish for, but actually the reality of it is horrifying and lonely and suffering. But I guess that's not true of money, according to your
I mean, the thing about when you win Monopoly, there's a few things that happen. One, you've crushed your enemies, like the other people you're playing with.
Feels good for a while.
Feels good for at least 20 minutes, and then you have won. Like that you played the game the best, so there's like satisfaction with that. But because it's not real money, you can't do anything. But I mean, for instance, if you were going to live eternally, would you rather live eternally with no money or have Count Dracula's bank account?
Well, now we're compounding
I feel like if you lived eternally, you can figure out the money part. It's not like you're going to have eternal life now.
Totally. Like, you know what? I'm going to spend the next 100 years broke. That's going to be my thing this century.
I don't know.
Sort of like a Tim Ferriss experiment.
Yeah. I mean, like
experiments in living forever and ever.
Well, I mean, if you have like plenty of time, you just drop some money in your vampiric 401k and let the compound interest take care of it. Like you just come check on it in 100 years and be like, look at this, sweet. Or not. A feature of a lot of Herzog's movies that I adore, and it's one of my favorite things, are just the hordes of mutants that he rounds up to be side characters. I think the only person who beats him is maybe Alejandro Jodorowsky as far as getting just absolute weirdos to just be on screen for, like, I mean, the guy that plays Renfield is absolutely bizarre.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. Well, and also him not really hiring extras. He hired real Romani people for those scenes. He hired real locals for the casket carrying scenes, and that awesome bacchanalian, we're all dying, let's have a party in the plaza. Oh my God. There's actually extra footage of that shit. And it's awesome.
How do you
guy
find
like
that?
Dancing with a goat on the table.
Is that just like an easy, lazy YouTube
It's on YouTube.
search?
It totally is.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite Herzog things, sort of tangential to that, is animals, like how he has the rats in Aguirre that's monkeys. In the end, when he's about to die, there are all these little tiny cute monkeys crawling all over. And I noticed in this film that he has now 2 films with random animals shitting on camera. There's like a pig wandering through the shot with Isabel, just bloop, bloop.
Right.
And there's this great shot of Aguirre picking up one of the, Kinski picking up one of these monkeys. And as he turns off with his beautiful face, there are all these little turd pellets that come streaming out of the monkey. I would love to ask him if that was intentional, if he has a thing for capturing animals' poo on camera.
Well, this is a German film. So
yeah,
that's
the
too
one
obvious for me.
I mean, like,
I want to hear the great Herzog evade the question.
It is unimportant if the animal shits.
Yes.
Only that it can shit and may. You know what I could not find anywhere is the German version of this film. Like, because he shot it in 2 versions. There's an English version and the German version.
So weird. That's such intense.
Wait, you couldn't find the German version?
It's on YouTube.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's in my backpack.
Oh, as far as downloading it, it's not.
Okay.
Because I went and watched it, and then I was like, oh, I want the German version, and I just could not find it on.
Yeah.
Well, Herzog claims that the German version is better because it's mostly German actors. I did not get around to watching the English version, and for those listening, it was shot in any scene with dialogue, they shot it in English and German to avoid voiceover.
But then they dubbed almost the entire film is dubbed. Often in both language versions, it's heavily dubbed by not those actors, which brings up one of my biggest pet peeves about European cinema is because the language of cinema is mostly English because of the dominance of Hollywood. Most Italian and German cinema, the soundtrack, and I don't mean the score, but the soundtrack with the dialogue is often painful. And this movie gets away with it much better than say any Fellini film, which for me is like nails on a chalkboard. With beautiful imagery. Almost all Italian horror films, like the dubbing is laughable.
Yeah, the
and
sound's
bears
always
very,
jacked.
very little resemblance to what's happening on screen, and that seemed to be almost willful from Italian cinema makers.
It's weird. Maybe like I'm just not noticing it because I'm an English speaker, but in the same like for instance, American horror films of the same era, the sound doesn't seem to be that bad. I mean, like
it's just deprioritized in especially Italian cinema. I mean, that was a stated thing about Fellini: is film is about image; it's not about sound. But then with Herzog, he does an English version and then dubs it, but he gets voice actors who don't seem to speak English either.
Are we sure he did it? Because that sounds like something he would be against.
That was the information I got.
Gotcha.
It's hard to know sometimes what he would be against. Like when it's interesting how somebody will ask him a question in like an audience Q&A, and he'll just like stop them just before the question even happens. He's like, this is the wrong question.
Yep.
And then the person will just keep going with it, and then he'll just answer the question normally. Though it's a weird thing that I've seen him do a bunch of times, and you know, he talks a lot about like how he doesn't ever want to teach any like actual film technique or anything like that. And I mean, he doesn't seem to have that whole like, I'm going to just be an amateur, go out and shoot and make it happen, just fake it till you make it thing. Like that doesn't seem to be part of his deal.
Yeah.
But he also seems to be not very interested in like at least at the very least instructing on film craft. It's like you should have that before you even get to him, is his idea on it.
He has a master class now, so I'm curious what is in there.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think their whole raison d'etre is to give you solid information about whatever craft the famous person is teaching.
How to forge documents and steal money online or something.
That would be great if
Yeah.
there's like lesson 1, picking locks, lesson 2, lying to the authorities.
He goes to do his rogue film school quite a bit in Guide for the Perplexed. I feel like I've seen his syllabus, I guess is what it would be, in multiple places, and it all seems to basically be the same books he recommends, and then the lock picking and the document forging. But I feel like document forging is not going to be the same game today as it was 20, 30 years ago. You know, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. Or maybe, I don't know.
Maybe now it would just be hurting people's feelings online or something.
Yeah. You just be cruel to them.
What else we got? You have more notes than me.
No,
So.
I think I got a lot of it out. I just love the first couple minutes of this film and how it opens with the mummies and sort of sets this tone of like a legacy of a scourge or death. And I was reading, I love Roger Ebert, and I love how palpable it is that he enjoys Herzog. And he said something like, well, Herzog once told me he believes in the voodoo of a location, which is why he went back to Guanajuato in Mexico to shoot these mummies. I just love that transition from the mummies to the bat to Lucy waking up, and then we get kitten porn.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the kitten porn?
It's great. Well, it's these animals pawing at Lucy's photo and a lock of her hair, like these cute,
Yes.
adorable, very seductive. I mean, that's what kittens are, clawing at her representation.
It's almost establishing too, like they're so innocent and adorable, but it's also establishing for me like something animalistic, fascinated by Lucy. There's also like, I love taking in just what's in the picture. Like there's choices here, and there's bruised apples, like not fresh, perfect apples.
Like she's not virginal.
Or
like she is in most Dracula films.
I think it's more that she is, that it's about what's coming, less about her being pure. The locket is blue and it has 2 shafts of wheat on it, which I had to look up because, again, I was like, why wheat?
Yeah.
And it's sort of a biblical reference to love and charity, could also be the harvest. You know, 2 is obviously a significant thing. But I also appreciated that it was an homage to the opening shot of Ellen in Murnau's Nosferatu, because she's playing on a windowsill with what looks like a locket, but is probably like a ball dangling from a string, and she's playing with a kitten. So I felt like that was sort of Herzog's way of homaging that first shot.
My wife Monique asked me, is it safe to call Isabella Gianni the goth Molly Ringwald?
Ooh.
Sure.
She
I'm going to say yes.
Far, like, I love that her character, like, they really do try to, I felt like her having kittens was like a way to make her pure and almost infantilize her.
Yeah.
But from the get-go, she's just so savvy. And like, there's that moment on the beach where she's like, I know this is going to sound weak or weird coming from the heart of a woman. Like, it's so like she knows that she's in a place of like, I have a gut feeling and you're not going to believe me because I'm like your little virginal wife that plays with kittens.
I also love that the structure of this movie is that Jonathan Harker is pretty much the protagonist, and then he goes to the castle, and then he's kind of just out. Like he's kind of barely in the movie. He barely functions in the movie, and Lucy takes over. It becomes her film. She becomes the protagonist, and she becomes the hero, sacrificing herself.
Right.
Ends up not actually working the way she wanted it to, but that she's cast, all in glowing whites and virginal and purity, and is willing to and able to go the distance. She's the one who has the knowledge, and she's the one who has the bravery to take this thing down. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm used to the image of, Van Helsing stomping into a tomb and like flinging open caskets and like, we have to cut off the bitch's head and all this stuff. And she goes to Van Helsing with this information, and he's like, we live in an enlightened century.
Van Helsing's basically useless. And I mean, he's really not much of a vampire hunter in this one. I mean, no one is really except for Lucy, and she just basically lays a trap, which is her.
I would love the sequel to this movie rather than it being Harker now is the vampire actually following Van Helsing, just being like, fuck.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Where do you think they take him? I love how the one town employee is this little old guy talking about like the odd characters that Herzog casts. He's like, but I don't have a weapon. Where do I take him? Where are we going?
There's no one at the jail. Yeah, and you realize like Van Helsing could totally get out of where he was going to come back.
I was waiting for that. Yeah.
There's a scene with Count Dracula that I really love is when he's in the castle and he's talking to him basically about the wolves and the music they make, which is from, the book. And he has this whole little dialogue about how you can't understand the wolves because you're not a predator. And I love that. It's one of the better scenes for me because it has the whole idea of like this vampire is not a human. He's not on your side. He's not your friend. He's going to eat you. And then he eats almost that entire town, which is kind of great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's a plague. Like, well, I mean, I think it's
there's sort of both. I think, yeah, because he says to Renfield, he's like, "You must go with the army of rats to the north and do some other work." So that still happens, and that's I guess what Jonathan goes to go do is go join Renfield in the army of rats in the north, which sounds very Game of Thrones.
So, if you were going to do a remake, more in the style, not how remakes are happening lately, but more in this style of how Herzog remade Murnau, what would you want to do?
Schindler's List. Just kidding.
As
a comedy.
I'm game for that.
No. I would probably want to remake The Goonies.
What would you want to bring to it?
I would want it to be like such an 80s movie and just like bring almost nothing to it. Like probably more of like a 21 Jump Street sort of redo of it. Like
Ready Player One?
No, like more like comedy of it, in the way that the Brady Bunch movie was kind of like making fun of it. Like sort of like you're making fun of nostalgia with the most nostalgic movie, the Goonies movie.
I think based on all previous conversations you and I have had, you've just concocted like my least favorite movie.
But that's kind of why. Like it's made to be like that. Like it's almost like making Goonies to make fun of Stranger Things, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would make no money, I'm sure.
No, are you kidding? It would just be fucking an avalanche of money.
Or Goonies, but from the perspective of the Fratelli family.
Oh.
Like that.
Yeah.
What about you, Alexa?
Well, just last night I was talking with some of my female filmmaker gang about remaking Cherry 2000.
Oh, Far Out.
Yeah.
I've only seen the trailer for that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that was a film I grew up with. It was on cable a lot. And it's funny, like, this is the third day in a row I've talked about it because on Friday I was hanging out with a filmmaker buddy of mine that was talking about potentially doing a project that was like a love triangle with a man, a woman, and a robot that's like a personal assistant. I was like, well, you should really watch Cherry 2000 because the whole premise of that is that this guy has instead of mail order brides, you have robot brides. And he's like madly in love with his robot bride. And then one day while they're getting hot and heavy in the kitchen, the dishwasher overflows and it short circuits her. And so he has to go on this adventure to try and find the one remaining model that is Cherry 2000. And he hires Melanie Griffith, who's this like 80s, like post-apocalyptic punk bounty hunter to help find and of course, by the time they find her, he's fallen in love with Melanie Griffith.
Oh.
But that film has so many like weird, just it's so of the 80s. Like I feel like you could almost do a double feature of it with Total Recall, even though it takes place technically on planet Earth. But just because it has this cavalcade of like crazy characters and action and this strange like post-apocalyptic vision of the future.
Have you ever seen Hell Comes to Frogtown?
No, that is a terrible name.
Oh man,
it's a really good episode of How Did This Get Made?
Ooh.
Oh, do they do an episode about it? Yeah, it's there's like a bunch of these weird post-apocalyptic movies that are just terrible. Like that's one. A Boy and His Dog is another weird post-apocalyptic 80s movie. And then it's better than the rest of them, but They Live is sort of in that, they all have like wrestlers in them, or Don Johnson is Boy and His Dog. It's just a weird time for movies.
Oh, I have a different one.
Okay.
Earth Girls Are Easy.
Oh, I haven't seen that since like it came out on VHS.
Oh, I love that movie so much.
Some Jeff Goldblum action.
Oh my God. Try and pick which one of those aliens is the most handsome. They're all like, it's all sweet spot. Damon Wayans, Jim Carrey. What film would you remake?
You know what? I came up with this question, but I didn't even think of an answer.
You can have one of mine.
Krull.
Yeah.
I read the novelization of Krull when I was a kid.
Wow, not even the novel, the novelization. Novelizations are like the special piece of useless literature. Oh, you know what? Someone needs to do Stepford Wives right.
It was called Get Out.
True.
Maybe M by Fritz Lang, if we keep it in the German cinema history, because I feel like that movie did something with sort of a police procedural, but like most movies of that sort that Hollywood has produced in the last 30 years aren't necessarily that good. Like Zodiac, or they're not actually very interesting. Although Seven was amazing.
I mean, the last really great one, that was just inarguably good, is probably Silence of the Lambs. I mean, that police movie was awesome.
Yeah.
That and 22 Jump Street, and that's another great police movie.
So you say often.
And Chips, the new Chips.
There's
Wow.
a new
High
Chips.
quality. Of all the Herzog movies, what's your favorite Herzog movie?
I have seen very few of them, I have to admit. The one that affected me the most is Lessons of Darkness from 1992. It has some interviews, but it's a lot of long shots of the burning Kuwaiti oil fields after the war, after they were all torched and destroyed and left to waste. And so they're just these oil fields just on fire and blackening the sky, and the soil, the desert is just covered in oil and destruction, and it's really long and languorous, and it really is just like this hell on earth, and it literally is on earth, and it really happened, and he shows it not gratuitously, but it's very real, and deeply horrifying and upsetting. Yeah. What about you guys?
I have two favorite, I guess three now, because Nosferatu really I adored that movie. And I hadn't quite sunk into it until I was preparing for this podcast. But from what I consider to be the golden era of Herzog, which is like before the 80s, when he was working with Kinski, it's Aguirre, The Wrath of God. Just really beautiful and heartbreaking and awful, and amazing performances, and just all the fun stuff that Herzog was doing back then, with like, he's always done the long meditative shots, but just this like impossible scenario that seems really absurd playing out over the course of a film. And then of the newer films in his body of work, Grizzly Man, I really enjoyed.
It's pretty damn good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I have like the same too, but sort of opposite. I like, of his narrative films, I think Aguirre's the best. And then Grizzly Man's just undeniable. I mean, the other thing about Grizzly Man that's interesting is a lot of Herzog's movies, you could show them to the wrong person, they're just not going to be into it. I don't know anybody who was not blown away by Grizzly Man. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just undeniably enthralling.
I think one interesting thing that you were saying, Alexa, we were talking earlier in general about like these long shots and things like that. And I don't know that Herzog comes up often in discussions about minimalism, but I think that the aesthetics of minimalism are certainly at play in a lot of his films. A lot of European cinema plays with time very differently than Hollywood, and always has. But Herzog in particular, these long shots that last by Hollywood standards too long. I think what it ends up doing is the thing that most good minimal art does, which is it makes you focus on the details. So if you've got these shots that last way too long, it gets you to this place where when Kinski flings the chair across the room, it's so abrupt and breathtaking that if it was a fast-paced movie, that wouldn't have as much weight, right? It would just be action, action, action. But it gets you to really absorb the details. But it also puts more pressure on the filmmaker to make those details, the long shots, more beautifully shot and more pristine. And those moments actually really fall together well, which he absolutely does.
I think there's great risk in him making films that way because I think a lot of people don't get it or appreciate it. And for me, watching those shots, sometimes it's almost unbearable. Like I'll love it, but also be like, oh my God, like cut to something else now. And I find myself sometimes, especially with the shots of water in both Nosferatu and Aguirre, the Wrath of God, being like, it's almost more than just me paying attention more to what's in the frame because have nothing else to look at. Like it starts to really turn off parts of my brain, or maybe even turn on parts of my brain to where like I am almost changing as a viewer, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And
like
actually,
it is like meditation,
Absolutely. Now that we're talking about this, my answer to the question of what film would I want to remake would be Zabriskie Point, which is all just endlessly long shots of desert and people not doing much. And it's totally one of my favorite movies, but it could potentially be very interesting to have it about like Antifa and technology and millennials rather than hippies and Black Power struggles and things like that.
Oh, wait, I changed my answer. I want to remake The Brown Bunny.
What's that?
Oh, God.
Just kidding.
I'm sorry, that joke was totally lost on me.
What's
maybe our audience doesn't know what you're talking about, so
it's Vincent Gallo's movie that Roger Ebert hated.
Only Roger Ebert?
Well, he's most famous for hating it. There was a bit of a feud. But it's basically a movie about Vincent Gallo riding his motorcycle around on an amateur pro-am circuit, and then Close Savini gives him a blowjob. That's the whole movie.
And allegedly, a real beach on camera.
Well, it certainly looks real.
Whatever.
But I will say, though, like, everybody hated on that movie, but it is Herzogian, and that it is just long, meditative, slow filmmaking. I mean, that's the whole thing.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, and if you're into that type of like two-stroke motorcycle racing, it's actually, I mean, this is a very unpopular opinion, but I would say that there are scenes in that movie that are as engaging as like, Steve McQueen's Le Mans. Like if you like racing and you're watching that movie, it's good. But like how many people are going to see some weird art house movie that are into that? Hardly any.
I think nothing you've said about this movie makes me want to see it.
Yeah, you wouldn't like it.
You're good.
Yeah.
I don't need to see blowjobs. Because it wouldn't be Scary Thoughts without talking about Nazis endlessly. One little thing about Nosferatu the Vampire that I think is super interesting is the guy who played John Harker. John Harker?
Jonathan?
The guy who played Jonathan Harker
Jonathan?
is the same actor who played Hitler in Downfall.
Is he? I thought he looked familiar.
So that fucking meme, the meme of Hitler losing his shit over whatever you want to fake the subtitles for, that's the guy who played Jonathan Harker.
Man, it is never not funny. Like no matter what the subject is, every
awesome.
Variation of it is hilarious to me.
Doesn't matter if it's Burning Man or
parallels. Wow.
So good.
Yeah. I just read a book about that time period in Hitler's life called Blitzed that was fucking great. It's all about the history of methamphetamine use in the Third Reich.
Wow.
And that, I think, would make a great movie.
I'm
yes.
intrigued. I would at least donate $25 to your Kickstarter.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably what I would want to make it about is the physician that was in charge of Hitler's regimen of shooting him up with stuff. Because the parallels between Hitler and that doctor and any Silicon Valley CEO and their fucking blood transfusion paleo hacker guys out here is pretty strong. And then you also think about Blitzkrieg only happened because of meth. It wasn't like they were like exceptionally super troopers. Like France at the time had the world's largest and strongest standing army, and these methed up Nazis bulldozed them and basically won. And, you know, that to me reminds me of, like, again, Silicon Valley, Adderall, like that type of business just crushing forward. I highly recommend the book. It is a bit dry in places. You can only read so much, but they're all over and over again. There's all these crazy details about just how drugs were such an important part of the war effort. Like, they had this type of submarine that was basically an underwater motorcycle with a bomb on it, and they had Hitler Youth kids drive it. And there was a regimen of like 10 different drugs that would make them alert and numb enough to want to go deliver these torpedoes at close range. Just crazy. That would be a good movie.
I quite agree.
Yeah.
Should we forward it to Herzog?
Get back into this shit, Herzog. Make a fictional movie.
Yeah, what's
When
he
was
doing
his
now?
last one? I think the last
It was
film
a
I saw
long
by
time
him was
ago.
Lo and Behold, and it didn't blow my skirt up.
Well, this Protocol New Orleans, the bad Lieutenant Protocol New Orleans.
I think that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is not bad. It's an all right movie.
But your last piece of fictional cinema was a Nicolas Cage movie. Like,
Yeah.
don't go out like that. You have to fix that.
Oh.
That is a bad line on your what?
My son, what have you done?
What's that?
It's with Molly Michael Shannon,
There's-
2009.
There's also like
Huh.
a pretty recent Nicole Kidman one, right? Like that he did
Oh, I think you're right.
that no one liked. Like everybody.
Queen of the Desert.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happens when you're making... I mean, he had 3 credits for 2016.
I mean, maybe he's just spent those tokens, and he just doesn't really have any good ones left.
If you were to give Herzog a topic to film and make a documentary out of, what would you want to?
A documentary?
Yeah, if you were gonna have a documentary,
I think your meth one is
Yeah.
great.
but he sort of needs to be able to film it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a little too.
Okay.
I honestly would take a doc and a narrative piece about Blitzed.
Yeah, that'd be pretty good. Mm-hmm. I would like to see him cover like either a wrestler or a fighter on their way down. I think would be really interesting.
Oh, you know what? I think I've brought this guy up before, and I had to ask you who it was again. But the security software guy who fled the country.
Oh,
and he's-
McAfee?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fuck that guy. But I want to see Herzog's take. It's just like cocaine and where's he living? Costa Rica?
He was in
Nicaragua?
Costa Rica, but
Okay.
he's not there anymore because of problems.
Really?
Yeah.
Cocaine's never caused anybody problems.
I mean, he's not even cocaine. He's like making his own forms of methamphetamine. Like he has a
Oh,
lab.
wow.
Yeah,
What an innovator.
he's definitely pushing the boundaries of bad decision making.
Should we leave it on him?
On McAfee?
Yeah.
Well,
Speaking of not going out like that, can we? Anything else about Nosferatu the Vampire?
Well,
before
I
we
tell you
sign
what
off?
would be a very fascinating thing for Herzog to cover is McAfee has said if Bitcoin does not hit a certain amount of money at a certain date, and it's a pretty aggressive amount of money, it's like a bill each Bitcoin would be worth like 200,000, maybe even $1 million. He said he was going to eat his own dick on national TV. So if Herzog
Black
could cover
Mirror.
McAfee eating his own dick on national TV because Bitcoin doesn't go up, that would be a fascinating documentary.
Yeah.
Wow.
Actually, if Herzog did a better black metal documentary, that would be pretty amazing.
I don't think that would be too on the nose for him. You know what I mean? It's like too bleak.
Right.
I could see him doing a really good like mountain clog dancing in the Appalachians documentary, you know?
Right. Which has been done.
Yeah.
Very well.
So I have a question for both of you, and it's pretty basic, and maybe not totally climactic, but what do you guys think this movie is about?
I don't necessarily know that it's about anything. I think it's more, it is an atmosphere and an idea and draws from a lot of aesthetics. And so it's about many things. It does have this immigration thing. It does have this thing about the horrors of eternal life. It does have these questions about love and what loving someone forever is. And it uses this old story to move through many questions and many visuals and many film techniques, but not necessarily one thing.
I like that answer. I will adhere.
Wait, Chad.
Oh no, I actually agree, and I think, and partially, I might be infected by his perspective, but I think he even said as much in some interview where he's like, this movie's not about anything. Like somebody asked him about like the immigrant experience in his movie, or the feminist, or Lucy is a feminist hero, and he essentially says, I don't think about any of that stuff at all. I just get an idea and I make a movie. And I think that his idea was just simply to remake Nosferatu in an homage way, and I think he did. And not that all that stuff isn't there, but I don't think his intention would be to do anything
Right.
like that.
I mean, that to me is the beauty of filmmaking. Is one filmmaker will put something out there, and then we basically remake the film.
Is that kind of your read on it too?
What you're yeah, I think you answered it. You hit a lot of the points that I too had considered throughout the film. He's just an interesting guy, and when he makes these films, I feel like it is almost just about. It's funny. I was just listening to an interview where like you said, someone was asking him a question, and he framed it. You could tell he practiced it. I think it was a film student. He's like, oftentimes the most important part of making a movie is what happened, like the journey of making the film. He's like, absolutely not. No, he shut him down. But there is that's the thing about Herzog, is he's almost like the unreliable narrator when it comes to him talking about himself and his work and what's going on and what this is about. And so we're kind of left to just sort of sleuth all these pieces together.
Yeah, it's really fascinating that, again, going back to where we started this conversation, which is about myth making, and the big part of his self-myth making is that there's no myth to be made and it doesn't matter. His greatest myth that he tries to spin is that the myth is irrelevant, only the film matters. But that is something that is so easy to cling to when talking about him, yeah?
Yeah, I think a way into that too is thinking about the book that he probably recommends more than any other book is The Peregrine by A.A. Jacobs, which is just basically a bird watching book. And I read it a couple months ago, and it is great. It is a great book. And the two things that are interesting about it is almost nothing about the author. And he speaks about the book on quite a few podcasts. And there's a philosophy podcast from Stanford entitled Opinions that I think is really, really good. And he's on an episode about the book, and he talks about how that it's delightful that no one knows anything about the author of that book at all, and that it wouldn't matter at all and actually would probably get it in the way. But if he's going for that, he is failing so bad. I mean, because you cannot escape him. When you read something that he's written, good luck not reading it in his voice, hearing his voice in your head or something like that. But, part of The Peregrine is about this extremely acute observations of just repetitive events. Like, how many times can a hawk land and kill a field mouse? Over and over again. That's what the whole book is about, with this scientific information added in, just layered in. And you realize a lot of his movies are kind of like that, where he's trying to make these really, really tight observations without any of himself in it. But I don't know, man. He's so weird. You can't take that dude out of that stuff.
I think he's kind of a trickster.
That's a good description.
Yeah,
Sure.
like he's actually kind of playful, and here, just talking about these dualities of him being like, it doesn't matter, don't pay attention to any of this, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain, as he's like publishing books and doing interviews and spinning all kinds of yarns, and I don't know, he's very playful, and it's even in Nosferatu, like there are totally playful moments and funny moments.
I think it's the same as interviews with Slipknot. When people ask them, why do you wear those masks, their answer is because we want people to pay attention just to the music and not to us. It's just like, it's such a weird lie. And that's what I think of Herzog.
Weird lie.
He's the new metal of German documentary filmmakers. Is that what you're saying?
No.
No.
Let's fade to black and roll the credits. Starting with, thanks, Alexa Fraser-Herron. Thanks for coming and joining us. That was awesome.
I had such a great time.
Good. What you said that the film you're working on is not to be found online, but where can people find you online?
Oh, that's a great question, and I have no real answers
question,
because
Alexa.
right now I am sort of a hermit as far as being a filmmaker. I'm super secret right now. Maybe just set up a Google alert for Alexa Fraser-Herron. That's all I got.
We'll have you back when
Have
you've got
me
something
back.
that we can tell
Have me
people
back, please.
to look up.
Perhaps our new metal episode.
Oh yeah. Let's totally do that.
We'll just do nothing but Korn's first 3 albums is what we'll talk about.
Oh, wow. I have a lot of homework then.
All right, subscribe to Scary Thoughts on iTunes and Stitcher. Join the mailing list, and join us next time for Faking It Phoebe, the novelette novella from 2017 with our guest, Meg Ilson. Thanks for listening.